At this juncture, Dennis, many Kenyans have been talking about which way Kenya will lean, so to speak, when it comes to the new administration. The Uhuru administration, or the Jubilee administration, was characterized by doing a lot of trade with the East, with the Far East, with China, basically. So we have been described as having faced East in the last 10 years or so. Does the early happenings inside the Ruto administration show you which way we will be facing in terms of Ruto's foreign policy? Or is it too early?
I think His Excellency is interested in the concept of multilateralism and bringing all partners aboard. And I think it's absolutely important. I saw him speak, and really I thought of this is our new Kwame Nkrumah, who he said is the father of Pan-Africanism. And what His Excellency did, he put through an excellent report card. In fact, you can call it the State of Africa sort of address. And indeed, he said that Africa needs urgent measures to recover, even from the pandemic, and the devastating economic dents and injury that it has received. He said 12 issues, but in conclusion, he put a case essentially on SDG 6, which speaks about Sustainable Development Goal 6 for clean water and sanitation for all. He spoke about SDG 2, which basically states of zero hunger. But essentially, the president said that the high debt to GDP levels, which IMF has considered unsustainable, right, needs help. You know, other countries are completely not able to sustain it. The huge gaps between spending and revenue, we are seeing that in the country as well at the end of the day. African countries, we are forced to explore alternative financing development models for ourselves. Then the high cost of borrowing in the country, at least you can see what that has happened. And then the other thing that is happening in Kenya and in Africa is the depreciation of our currencies, and it's across the African board. So therefore, Africa, and particularly the AU, needed to make an urgent case to pressure the G20 countries and multilaterals, commercial lenders, to suspend debt repayments until at least 2 years before now, 2 years after now. And that wealthier nations should be encouraged to voluntarily transfer part or all of their special drawing rights to boost foreign exchange thereabout. So essentially, all these obligations that Africa has, without us looking at the aspect of debt, right, the aspect of financing, fiscal instruments that Africa needs to own and to have and to deliberate and to administrate, then we are not going to be able to meet our developmental goals or any SDG whatsoever. And so the president was putting a strong case, a strong financial case for Africa. And even the very fact that Africa needs to be led to be food sovereign, you know, at the end of the day. So there were, when you read his entire thematics and his entire script, his theme was essentially moving Africa towards food sovereignty and economic sovereignty at the end of the day. Right. And one of the things that he mentioned, which was critical, was he mentioned something about the international community, which hit me like a truck. He mentioned that the exclusionism during COVID-19 was a clear glare that the international community looks at Africa with a scorn. All right. And that, at least on the floor of Unga, was one of the most awakening realizations, right, that I saw. All right, thank you. And I will ask you the same question. Does what you have seen so far with the very young Ruto administration, the so-called diplomatic charm offensive that we have seen, of course, when going to the UK, going for that summit with the King Charles III, and of course there was a funeral, then over to Unga, and he has met some leaders here and there, and the speech now at the General Assembly. Does it point to you the direction we are maybe taking as a country in terms of foreign policy, or is still early days?
Ben, I don't think we need to speculate on what direction we're taking with the foreign policy, because before we went to the ballot, Kenya Kwanza gave us their plan. Yes. And part of the plan is the foreign policy. So what this regime is looking at is, one, maintaining Kenya's status as an anchor state. This is talking about how, you know, we're a transportation hub, a financial hub in as far as Africa is concerned, a technological hub. So we're looking to retain that. We have been a very good ally and neighbor to our fellow African states and to our global partners. So again, when we're talking about the anchor state element, it's not just regionally, it's also globally. Then we're talking about global citizenship. So in as far as the multilateral institutions or organizations go, we're also looking at maintaining our relations with that, and the various candidatures we've had, we're also looking at capitalizing more to see how many more we can get. And then there's diaspora is going to be a huge conversation in this regime, because we're even talking about having a Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. In the past 2-3 weeks, we've had a lot of conversation about, I don't know what citizen in Saudi Arabia is suffering, they're coming back into the country. For a very long time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has had to bear the brunt of these issues. What Kenyans do not understand is that usually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs comes at the tail end of the process. Kenyans going to work in Saudi Arabia is a labor element. So there's also the role that the Ministry of Labor plays, and I dare say they have been failing at it, because they're the ones who get to register our agencies, they're the ones who get to vet them, they're the ones who get to audit to check whether, because they have a training curriculum,
right,
have these Kenyans undergone the proper training they're supposed to before they fly out of the country. So from what I see, this regime has identified that there's a gap. And that is why we're having the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, so that you have all of it under one roof, and then we can avoid all these problems. On top of that, we're going to be identifying Kenyans as per their skill set, their educational background, so that we're able to better position them for jobs in foreign countries. So we don't need to hazard a guess in terms of what direction we're taking. He's very clear on...
It's in black and white.
Yes, Africa first, and then the rest of the world follows. It's not rocket science.
All right. Ariba, do you agree?
Of course, I fully agree with Annabelle that the speculation of whether we are facing south, we are facing east, or we are facing north, I think it's quite an early conversation to have, because whereas this regime has been viewed to have faced a lot of Far East, that does not mean that it was in exclusion of the West. We still had a number of issues that we were collaborating with countries that are coming from the West. So whereas there's a conversation that there might be some kind of liking towards a particular side, whether Far East, Far South, or West, you cannot entirely place a country and neglect other global allies who are coming from another direction. So I fully agree with that.